Okay, so yesterday we talked about the graphic design elements, right? And those elements were the building blocks of any design, right? If you look at any ad, any painting, any photograph, you look at any composition, you're going to find those four things in them, right? You're going to be able to see lines. You're going to be able to see shapes. You're going to be able to identify a color scheme, hopefully. And you're going to be able to find textures or lack of textures, right? So today we're going to be looking at the principles behind those elements. So how are you supposed to use those effectively? So remember, elements are like the materials, principles are how you should use those materials. So the four that we're going to talk about specifically here with the visual design class at least is movement, balance, unity, and emphasis. All right. Now there may be smaller categories that you're going to have to kind of break down under each one of these. But for the most part, we're reducing it to four to kind of keep things organized. So first off, let's look at movement. Movement is the use of lines, color, and repetition to create the illusion of motion. All right. So you can use curved forms or lines, repetition of geometric forms, fuzzy lines or outlines. Any type of form where you repeat that form is definitely a good example there. So you can look at this on the slide and you can kind of see that we have this square. It looks kind of like it's tumbling down, right? We have some lines that kind of indicate that it's tumbling. And notice how it goes from a tint of orange and then transitions all the way to a shade of orange at the front here, right? So this is kind of indicate that it's further away. And then we repeat it. And as we repeat it, we increase that shading for the color, right? So the darker it is, the closer it is to us, the further away it is, the lighter it is, right? And that creates a sense of motion for us. Now, this is in a kind of simplistic example, but of course, we're going to look at some other examples that also indicate this. But basically, if you can point to something in a design that creates the illusion of movement or a sense of movement, then that's going to be movement, right? And that can be lines. It can be repetition of shapes. It can be the flapping of a character's jacket that could create a sense of movement, all right? So it can be a multitude of things when we're thinking about movement here. All right. So if we're thinking about lines, if we're thinking about lines from yesterday, we were just talking about identifying the types of lines, right? Is it curved? Is it straight? Is it bold? Is it a fine line of some kind? So now we're kind of extending that into motion and movement, all right? Because lines can definitely create a sense of movement. So these excerpts right here from Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. And like I said yesterday, we would be looking at some excerpts from his book here. Basically, he is a college professor, teaches an entire course load on comic books. All right, that's all he teaches. So he really breaks them down. His textbooks are graphic novels. So really awesome stuff here. And it kind of takes an academic approach to comics. And really, that's kind of one of the things we're going to look at in here too. So if you look at these examples here, you can see how lines are used to create a sense of movement. So we can see the lines streaming off this guy's fist here. You can see the lines kind of radiating off her face as he hits her, right? They're doing some sparring or something. And then you can also look at the lines, these action lines that kind of surround them to kind of show us, maybe emphasize the intensity of the hit, right? So lines are doing a lot of things in this image here. And really, if we want to break it down into four ways to use lines to create movement, one, you can have those lines streaming behind the character. Two, you can have those lines streaming behind the character and some cross-hatching to create some silhouettes, right? Three, you can have actual silhouettes that aren't cross-hatched behind the main character here. Or you can use lines to blur the entirety of the background. So those are the four ways usually that movement is created. Most of the time, you're going to see this one right here, right? Lines streaming off something. You can see here, line streaming off, right? One good example, because I'm a comic book fan and Spider-Man fan, if you look at especially the 90s Spider-Man comics, they would repeat Spider-Man in several different positions. And then, of course, wherever he lands. So you may see a Spider-Man up on a building, then one like swinging down, and then one swinging a little further, and then one perched on another building, right? And we know there's not 4 Spider-Man there or Spider-Men there. There's one. We just see the path that he traveled, right? Okay. So next one, balance. Balance is the act of comparing or estimating two things, one against another, or the contrast between them. All right, so this is where contrast comes into play with balance. So it could be empty space and filled space, right? So if you see, say this slide, for example, we have an image down here, we got text over here, but then we have this empty space over here. Is it balanced very well? I would say probably not, but you know, there is a sense of balance in there a little bit. Text and images. So here we have an image. Up here we have a text, or have some text, right? Color and no color, or textures and flat colors. So think back to that photograph we looked at yesterday. We had the textures on the bed contrasting or balancing with the lack of texture on the wall, right? If you look at this example here, we got the fulcrum right here, and this is something to consider too. Balance does not mean that an image has to match perfectly when you divide it into sectors or sections, all right? Balance means that you have put things in place so one does not dominate or overpower another aspect of the image, right? So if you look at this, we got a lot of real estate here, right? And then a small ball. And we have a little bit of real estate here and a bigger ball, right? We would say this is balanced because even though we have a bigger ball over here, we've given it less space to exist in, right? And vice versa over here. Now, there are 3 types of balance that you got to consider, all right? Symmetrical, asymmetrical, and radial symmetry, all right? All designs will fall into one of these categories, all right? If something does not have symmetry or radial symmetry, then it's going to be asymmetrical, right? So every time you look at a design, it's going to fall into one of these categories. And we're going to look at a couple of examples here. So to decide whether something does have symmetrical balance, usually you would divide them one of 3 ways. So you got vertical, right? Horizontal and diagonal, okay? What you want to do here is identify which balance that it does have, right? By dividing an image using this method. So you would look at, if we're doing vertical, you'd look at the left side and the right side. Do they match up for the most part? Then it's symmetrical. If they don't, then it's asymmetrical, right? And same rule applies for the rest of them here. All right, and there's a couple other examples too. All right, let's look at these actual photographic examples here. So this is obviously an image of a building taken from below it somewhere. Now, if I was going to figure out what balance it has, all I got to do is ask myself, all right, if I divide it this way, do both sides match for the most part? That's vertical balance. I would say, yeah, right? This side would match that side. So we would say this image has vertical symmetrical balance. If I divide it horizontally, does it match up? No. If I divide it diagonally, no. All right. So because we do have symmetrical balance here, all right, vertical symmetrical balance, we would say that it has vertical symmetrical balance. Okay. All right, then we have this picture of an eagle kind of gliding over water here. If I divide it vertically, all right, you would say both sides match. So that would be vertical symmetry. If I divide it horizontally, all right, we would also say that they match. Now, this is a good kind of point to make. How I said that each side does not have to necessarily match perfectly. You can see we still have the shape of the eagle in the water. It's being reflected, right? So it's the same basic shape, looks very similar. So we could also say that this has horizontal symmetry as well. So this is vertically and horizontally symmetrical. Now, if we do diagonal, of course, that's not going to work out too well for us there. But vertical and horizontal, definitely. Okay, then we have asymmetrical balance. And this is where we have, if we divide the image, it's not going to match up, but we still do have some balance going on here. So if you look at this landscape photo here, we have this piece of driftwood, a river, and then a nuclear power plant, right? So if we divide this vertically, doesn't match up. We divide it horizontally, doesn't match up, right? Diagonally, doesn't match up. But it does still have a sense of balance because this piece of wood, prominent in the foreground, is balancing out the nuclear power plant in the background, all right? And this is where you're gonna have to start using kind of an interpretive eye to say, hey, this does have balance. It's asymmetrical, but it does have it, right? Same with this landscape here, right? Divide it in half, doesn't match up. Divide it horizontally, doesn't match up. But it's still balanced because we have the sun and the hot air balloon here, and the sky and the landscape here, right? So asymmetrical balance would work for that one as well. And then lastly, we have this painting here, Sistine Chapel, God and Adam. Definitely asymmetrical balance, but we're balancing out our characters here with God kind of floating here, and then other angels with him, and then Adam in the landscape here definitely balance each other out when you think about it. Okay. So before I continue on, just want to have a, let's see, check our chat here. Anime, comics, or manga use that quite a bit. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Sense of motion in anime and manga is central to it, right? And you're always going to see that technique there. Do you guys have any questions so far about any of the topics we've talked about? We're good to go? All right. All right, thank you. Next, we have radial balance, and this is going to be pretty easy to pick out, right? If you have a circular object or composition happening, then that's probably going to be radial balance. So you can see here kind of the swirling effect with tracking stars. We have this parking garage, definitely photoshopped here because the parking garage, I don't know of any that are, you know, go that far into the ground or that tall. But this would definitely be radial balance as well. And then this right here is kind of your classic example of radial balance. So notice everything emanates from the center of this design, and you can divide it vertically, horizontally, or diagonally, and it's always going to match up, right? So this would be vertically, horizontally, and diagonally symmetrical and have radial balance, right? Okay. Next thing we have is unity. And that's going to be the correct balance of composition or color that produces a harmonious effect, all right? So unity kind of boils down to anything that ties the design together. Something you use or you see used consistently in a design could be an example of unity, all right? So if we look at this logo here, all right, we would say this is some sort of business. It says In Gear Clocks. Notice it uses kind of tints and shades of gray. So that would be a characteristic of unity. Notice that it's talking about clocks. It uses the term gear, and then it uses gears in the design. That would be in another way it creates a harmonious effect, right? So just kind of keep that in mind, that sometimes the message of the design can be connected to the actual visuals of the design, right? And that could be Unity as well. And we'll look at more examples here in a little bit. And then lastly, we have emphasis. And emphasis is to express with particular stress or force. So if you look at this business here, solar mapping business, notice that we have replaced the O in solar with a sun, all right, to emphasize the fact that it is a solar mapping business, right? So definitely goes back to message and purpose of the business and connecting that to your design there, okay? Also, if this was an advertisement and we just saw this, of course, the name is emphasized here because it's the biggest thing on the image, right? And it's contrasting with the background, black background, white letters, right? To emphasize that as well. So there are multiple ways to explain how something is emphasized, and there's multiple ways to emphasize something in a design. Okay, so what I want to do here is just briefly review this one here with you guys. And we'll do this one as a class, and then the next one I want you to take a couple of minutes, and then you're going to kind of look at it on your own and tell me some stuff in the chat. So if I'm looking at this and I need to break this down based on the graphic design principles of movement, balance, unity, and emphasis, here's what I might have. So I may say movement in this design is created with the lines for the star here, the lines for the kind of cloud popping out here, the little explosion that's behind the cloud here. All of those things create a sense of movement in the design. If I'm thinking about balance, if I divided this vertically, definitely not symmetrical. If I divide it horizontally, all right, very similar in nature. So we maybe say that it might have horizontal symmetry there. And then we could also say that in some cases, and this is where you're going to have to use your interpretive skills here, this may have radial balance as well, because notice we have our title of whatever it is we're advertising here, and then the hands and the explosion kind of frame it out, right? So we kind of have a radial pattern here going. So I could definitely see radial happening with this as well. Now, what about unity? One other balance here. Remember, we're thinking about contrast with balance as well. Notice how we have the photorealistic hands and then the comic book style graphics beside of it, right? So we're contrasting those two things for some purpose. Who knows what it is? We don't know what this organization is. We don't know what they do, but they are definitely contrasting photorealism with comic book stylings. Okay. All right, unity. We can say that the entire design, minus the hands, has a comic book feel and style to it. Notice the bold lines. The font used here kind of looks like it is comic book font or lettering. We have the stippling in the background. If you look at some older comics, usually they printed little dots to color them, and we have that repeated here. So with Unity, we have a lot of comic book stylings here. With Unity, we can also talk about color. We have a lot of nice warm colors here besides the explosion, right? So it uses a lot of warm colors. And then emphasis, what we're emphasizing here is the title of whatever it is we're looking at, right? Design with diversity. And if you look at the hands here, we're emphasizing that diversity because we have a lot of different colors of hands coming around and framing this title out, right? So definitely a lot going on in this. And that's kind of what I want you guys to take away from this, that every design has some sort of purpose or meaning behind it. And to break it down using these 4 categories is really going to help you understand what's going on. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Here's your next design, all right? So a poster for Into the Spider-Verse. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, and I just want you to tell me one thing that you see related to one of these categories. So if you notice movement, put something in the chat about movement. If you notice something with balance, put something in the chat about balance, and etc. All right. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to tell me something. Take a look at it and tell me something, and then we'll discuss it. All right. All right. So 3 minutes. And remember, just throw it in the chat. Remember, when you're thinking about balance, think about symmetrical, asymmetrical, radial. With unity, think about color scheme. That would definitely be something I would consider. Emphasis, think about the size of certain aspects of the photo, right? All those can be commented on here. And as you're commenting, make sure you specifically identify what you're talking about, right? And I'll go through those in about 1 minute. Got about 1 minute. Okay, about 10 seconds.
I have a question real quick.
Sure, yeah, what you got?
Did you get my, what was it called? Design analysis yesterday?
I haven't graded those yet. Do you want me to check right quick before we start?
Yeah, because I was trying to turn it in and it wouldn't let me. Like, I was pressing the button and it didn't, like, turn it in.
Okay, sure. Let me see here. No, I do not have it.
Okay, I'll try to return it in or something.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. All right.
The same thing happened to me.
What was it telling you?
I can't remember.
Or when you click the button and just sit there and spin?
It didn't say anything, it just wouldn't, like, turn it in.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if you keep running into that, then we'll figure something else out. Whether that be you just email me your document or whatever. So don't stress over it. No worries. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at some of your comments here, see what you found. All right. Okay. All right. Close or movement. Okay. Yes, Jose, that would be Miles Morales there. So if you look at the straps or his strings on his hoodie, the webbing that he has here, the way his clothes are flowing, definitely a sense of movement there. And you can look at all the different Spider-Man here. You got Peter Parker up here doing his thing, Spider-Gwen, Spider-Man Noir down here. all of their clothes are moving in a way to create that sense of movement. All right, good. Webs indicate movement. Radial lettering. Okay, yeah, let's talk about this for a second. So if you look at the lettering, it kind of inches upward. All right. And I would definitely say that this has radial symmetry. Now, this is hard to pick out sometimes because we don't have that kind of circular design ready to go with this. But if you look, we have our title, and then it slowly kind of curves around miles and then comes to the center, right? So that would definitely be radial symmetry there. Okay, good. All right, movement in the background, yeah. Different leg positions, movement, yeah, good. Webs, all right. Clothes are going backwards, good. All right, emphasis. All right, let's talk about emphasis for a second. Yeah, you said the title, right? Also, if you think about it, who is the main character of this movie, right? Just by looking at the poster, you're going to know that it's Miles, right? Why? Because he's front and center, and he is the largest person on the poster who is on the poster fully, right? All the other Spider-Men and women are kind of surrounding him. They're smaller in size, or they're not completely on the poster. So we can look at this poster and gauge how important each one of these characters are to this overall story, usually if the design is done right. So we would say Miles is main character, definitely. Peter Parker probably plays a big role because he's bigger, he's big on the design as well. And then we know that Spider-Gwen, Mech Spider-Girl, whoever she is, I can never remember her name, and then Spider-Man Noir, they all kind of play supporting roles. And I'm kind of highly disappointed that Spider-Ham is not on here, but I'll take that up with the production company, I guess. Okay, let's look here. All right. The difference between the lettering and Into the Spider. Okay, so we got some contrast there, Felicity, sure. With the difference between the Spider-Man logo here and then the Into the Spider-Verse, good. This would be ornamental, right? And of course, this would be just regular sans serif, all caps. All right. Peter Parker, yes. My Google is broken. If we think about colors as well, there are two colors that are featured prominently in the design that I think you should definitely notice here for Unity, and that's going to be red and blue. A lot of red, blue, and black, right? And that kind of ties everything together from a Unity perspective because we're kind of sticking with those same colors there, right? So yeah, good job, guys. You picked those things out. You noticed what I wanted you to notice, so good job. Okay. Are there any questions at this point about the principles of design? All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I am